In this video, we're going to show you how to replace the engine valve cover gasket on your Nissan Altima, located in the engine bay. Remove the negative battery cable. I'm going to use a 10mm wrench. Put that off to the side. Take the two 10s out of the front air box using a 10mm socket. Once those two 10mm are out, push this front air box in, twist it up, and pull out. Put that to the side. Using a pair of pliers, we're going to push the MAF connector harness through. Squeeze on the tabs, push it through. Disconnect the mass airflow sensor connector. Remove the MAF sensor using a Phillips head screwdriver. Pull the MAF sensor out. Using an 8mm wrench, loosen the hose clamp going to the air box from the throttle body. Get it to a point where it's loose on the air box. There's a 10mm bolt down next to the side of the strut tower. Loosen that bolt. Remove the air box. It slides into two rubbers on the bottom, and this bolt came with my assembly. Using a 5mm hex head, we're going to remove the 3 bolts that hold on the engine cover. Lift that up and put it to the side. Using a pair of pliers, we're going to remove the 2 hose clamps on the PCV hose. Pull it off, put it to the side. Do the same thing on this one. This one you can kind of just turn up and leave there. Using a flathead screwdriver, pull back on this little pull tab. And pull the power steering reservoir off of there and kind of just put it to the side for now. Using an 18mm socket, we're going to remove the bolt out of the right-hand engine torque rod. Using a jack, a piece of wood, or a jack stand, support the engine. Looking at the front of the vehicle, on the passenger side, right to the left of the oil pan, is a solid piece of metal that will support the engine. Using a 16mm socket, remove the 4 bolts. Using an 18mm socket, remove the 18mm nut. And remove this bracket. Remove the 5 14mm bolts on the engine bracket. Make sure all the bolts pull up freely. Using a 10mm socket, Remove the ground straps on top of the bracket. Using a trim tool, remove the engine clip, just pry up on it. Then we'll move to that clip. Using a set of needle nose pliers, squeeze the back of it, pull it forward. Remove the connector off the ignition coil, push down on this tab and pull back. Do the same thing down the line. Using a trim tool, I'm going to pry up on the injector harness clip, pop that out of place. Back to the needle nose pliers, pull that out, and then get your last ignition coil connector. Pop that off. Using a 10mm socket, remove the ignition coil bolts. Before removing my ignition coils, I do like to mark them, mark their position. I'm going to put 1, 2, 3, and 4. Doesn't have to be in the right cylinders, it's just for your own knowledge. I know that 1 will start here and so on. You can also put them up on the cowl, just in order. With all the bolts loose, pull straight up on the engine bracket. I'm just going to leave my bolts in there and just put it to the side. Remove your oil cap, put that to the side. You can throw it away if you're not going to reuse it. If you're going to reuse it, keep it. Using a pair of long right-hand needle nose pliers, remove the injector connectors. These clips, pinch them on the bottom and pull up. Pinching them like this and then pulling. I switched to a pair of 45-degree pliers. Keep going down the line. Using a long screwdriver, I'm going to push up on the connector as I push in on the tab. If you're using tools on these connectors, be very careful. They can be very brittle and break, and then you'll have to replace the whole connector. Once you have everything disconnected, grab your harness and pull it out of the way to the front. Remove the little ground loop around the engine cover mount and kind of pull your harness forward just a little bit to get clearance to pull the valve cover up. Try not to move the harness too much at these connections. The harness can start breaking the wires inside, and then you can end up with a much bigger problem. I'm going to use a vacuum and clean up all around where the ignition coils were. And I also cleaned around the edges of the valve cover itself. Using a 10mm socket, we're going to remove the bolts around the valve cover. Follow the sequence in which I do them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Once all your bolts are loose, go ahead and remove them all from the valve cover. Using a flathead screwdriver under this ear, I'm going to slightly wiggle it, try and break the tension on the valve cover. You don't want to do this anywhere where the gasket is going to be sealing, because you do not want to mar the sealing surfaces. Give it a little wiggle, and then pull the valve cover out. In the spots where the camshaft cover meets this sealing surface, there's going to be RTV in all 4 corners. You're going to want to clean all of that RTV off. Using a light abrasive pad, clean all of the mating surface. Be sure to not mark it up, you just want to get it clean. When you're cleaning these sides, it's not a bad idea to put a rag in there to make it so that when you're cleaning it, nothing can fall in. If you get a piece of RTV that falls into an oil galley, it can plug up the filter or the galley, and it can starve the engine. Cause you some big problems. Now that that's set up, we're going to go through and clean our whole mating surface. Going to use a razor blade and scrape the RTV down. Be very careful not to score the mating surface. And just do the best you can. Then do the same thing on the other 3 corners. Using a very fine piece of sandpaper wrapped around a block of wood, go ahead and go down and clean the mating surface. You don't want to take a lot of material off, you just want to get any big gunk spots off. Do the same thing around the whole thing. Using a brake parts cleaner, I'm going to spray a rag and go around and just wipe down the surface. Go around the whole mating surface and always wipe away. Don't wipe in. Remove the valve cover gasket from the valve cover. Remove the RTV, if you have any, on your valve cover. I like to use a little plastic trim tool. Just give it a good scrape. Do that in all four corners, or anywhere that the RTV is located on the valve cover. Careful if you use something sharp, just to make sure you don't mar up the plastic. Give yourself an uneven mating surface. Check and make sure no RTV fell on the inside area. If it did, just pick it out. Take a clean rag and wipe down the area where the gasket will sit. You can use that trim tool again and put your rag over it and then get inside of the channel. Just try and make it as clean as possible. I like to clean the oil off of the top of the cover on the underside. Should look about like that when you're done. Install the gasket. This only fits one way. And you want the flat side of the gasket pointing up. If you have any rusty hardware going to the valve cover before you install it, now would be the time to clean it. I'm going to clean the shank of this bolt off and make it shiny again. Using a wire wheel, I just cleaned the shank of the bolt. You can repeat that process for as many bolts that are dirty, or you can just clean them all. Using gasket maker, I'm going to go around and put a dab at the corners of the mating surface of the rocker cover. And do that in all four corners. If you use a glove, make sure your glove is clean of oil or any sand or anything on it. Install the valve cover into the vehicle. Give it a little push down, and then start all of your bolts hand tight. Go around and make all of the bolts just contact the valve cover, but don't put any force on it. There is a two-step torquing sequence to this valve cover. Follow my sequence. This is bolt 1. Torque it to 17 inch-pounds. Number 2. Three. 17. This is 4. 5. 6. 7. 8. 9. 10. 10, 11, 12. Our second step in torquing is to 74 inch-pounds in the same sequence. If you don't have a torque wrench, do the best you can. Install the injector harness back into place. Push the connectors down until you hear a click. Install the harness clips back into the bracket. Install the injector harness clip into the top of the valve cover. Install your ignition coils. Start the bolts hand tight. Put your oil cap back on. Grab your engine mount bracket. Install that into place. Start these bolts finger tight. Go through and snug these down. Torque the engine mount brackets to 36 foot-pounds. If you don't have a torque wrench, do the best you can. Snug down the 10mm ignition coil bolts. If you have this little wire loop, make sure you reinstall it. Install the connectors onto the ignition coils. Push until you hear a click. Install the engine harness clips into their brackets. Pull your ground cables up. Put the 10mm bolts in there. Start them by hand and then snug them down. Install the engine harness clip into the engine bracket. Reinstall the blow-by hose and PCV valve hose, and then put these 3 clamps back on. Slide the hose clamp to where it was previously installed. Install the engine support bracket. Install the bolts into the engine mount bracket first. Start them by hand. And the nut At this point, you may need to lift the engine up just a little bit using your jack. Using a 16mm socket and an air tool or electric tool, tighten down your engine support bracket bolts. And using an 18mm socket, tighten the nut. Pull the power steering reservoir forward and install the engine torque rod mount bolt. You may need to use a pry bar or a flat blade screwdriver and pry in an area to get it to line up with the hole for you. Using an 18mm socket, go ahead and tighten that down. Reinstall the power steering reservoir. Make sure it clips back into place. Sure that the air inlet hose is properly seated on the box and not bent or twisted. Line the bottom box pegs up with the rubbers and push them into place. Tighten down the 8mm hose clamp. Tighten it down until the hose doesn't move. Reinstall the mass airflow sensor, 2 Phillips head screws, install the connector, push until you hear a click, push the harness clips back into place. I'm going to use a magnet to reinstall the 10mm bolt on the side of the airbox. Start it by hand, and then we'll tighten it down. Install the front of the airbox, put it into the airbox, push down, and put in your 2 10mm bolts. Tighten them down. Reinstall the negative battery cable. Using a 10mm wrench, we're going to tighten it down. Reinstall the engine cover. Put our 5mm hex head bolts back in. And snug them down.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.